This is the story of the fire the Soviets put out with a nuclear bomb. In the heart of Central Asia, deep in the deserts of Soviet Uzbekistan, a disaster broke out that seemed unstoppable. For more than 2 years, a massive inferno raged, fueled not by wood or oil, but by pressurized natural gas bursting straight from the earth. And when all ordinary methods failed, the Soviet Union turned to something extraordinary, a nuclear bomb. Our story begins in the late 1950s. At the time, the USSR was experiencing rapid industrialization, and this brought with it a growing demand for energy resources. The Soviet leadership, led by Nikita Khrushchev, sought to meet this demand by expanding the country's oil and gas fields, particularly in its Central Asian republics. This region, rich in natural resources, became the focus of intensive exploration and extraction efforts. One such effort took place on December 1, 1963, at the Urta-Bulak gas field in Uzbekistan. The Soviets had discovered significant deposits of natural gas in the area, and operations were underway to extract it. It was during this process that a group of Soviet engineers drilled through a layer of rock and unexpectedly encountered a pocket of pressurized gas. What they didn't know was that they had breached a subterranean reservoir unlike any they had dealt with before. Under a crushing pressure of more than 350 atmospheres, a massive jet of gas shot skyward, erupting into a towering pillar of flame. The fiery torch roared into the heavens day and night, its glow visible for kilometers across the flat, featureless desert. As the well continued to spew gas and oil into the air, it quickly became clear that this was no ordinary disaster. To make matters worse, the location of the accident was extremely remote. The nearest settlement was several kilometers away, and the nearest major city, Tashkent, was more than 100 kilometers from the site. This meant that the Soviets had to quickly mobilize resources from distant regions just to reach the affected area. But even once they got there, they found that their standard equipment and techniques were useless. The fire was far too big and too intense to be brought under control with conventional methods. Attempts to stop the flow of gas with cement and drilling mud failed. And as time went on, it became increasingly clear that the situation was spiraling out of control. The burning question was, how could they put out a fire that was fueled by an endless supply of pressurized gas? The Soviets tried everything they could think of. They built a massive concrete dome over the well in an attempt to suffocate the fire, but it was useless. The gas continued to erupt and extinguish the flames. As the fire continued to burn, the Soviets became increasingly desperate. It was not only a massive embarrassment for the Soviet Union's oil and gas industry, but it was also a potential environmental hazard. If the fire spread to nearby oil pipelines, it could cause a catastrophic explosion. And the longer it burned, the more gas and oil was wasted, depriving the Soviet Union of valuable resources. In those moments of desperation, the Soviets turned to a solution so audacious and terrifying that it had never been considered before: a nuclear bomb. Part 2: Desperation. At this point, the Soviet leadership was in a state of panic. The fire had been burning for months, and it was clear that conventional methods would not work. Something radical had to be done. As the fire continued to burn, a team of Soviet engineers huddled over maps and diagrams in a small room. They discussed the possibility of digging a shaft to the well and placing explosives near the gas channel. But the intense heat and fumes made it impossible for anyone to approach the well. Then someone mentioned the remote possibility of using a nuclear explosion to stop the fire. The idea was met with disbelief. A nuclear bomb was a weapon of mass destruction. Using one to stop a gas well seemed insane. But as days turned into weeks and the fire refused to be extinguished, the idea began to seem less audacious and more necessary. After much deliberation and many heated arguments, the Soviet Politburo approved the plan. The nuclear solution was to be put into action. Meanwhile, back at the site, workers toiled day and night to prepare for the operation. They constructed a special train equipped with a mobile nuclear reactor and the necessary infrastructure to support the operation. This reactor would generate the immense power needed to stop the fire, but it was also a potential hazard. The workers knew that if something went wrong, the explosion could spread radioactive contamination across the desert. Still, they pressed on, driven by the urgency of the situation. With the train in place, it was time to put the plan into action. Part 3: The nuclear solution. The day of the operation dawned bright and clear, but no one at the site felt any optimism. They knew what they were about to do was unprecedented and potentially dangerous. A team of Soviet scientists and military personnel gathered around a table studying maps and diagrams of the proposed detonation site. They calculated the exact location where the nuclear explosion would have the greatest impact. The goal was to stop the gas well without causing any major environmental damage. When they were ready, a red button was pressed, and a blinding flash lit up the desert, followed by a deafening roar. The ground shook violently, and a mushroom cloud rose into the sky. But as the dust settled, it became clear that the explosion had worked. The gas well, which had burned for over 2 years, was finally out. The fiery pillar that had dominated the landscape was reduced to a smoldering pile of ash and debris. The Soviets had stopped the fire with a nuclear bomb. Part 4: The Outcome. In the aftermath of the explosion, a sense of relief and triumph swept across the site. The operation had been a success, but it was also a sobering reminder of the destructive power of the atom. Teams of scientists and engineers descended on the site to study the effects of the explosion. They measured radiation levels, analyzed soil samples, and assessed the overall impact on the environment. Their findings were cautiously optimistic. While there had been some radioactive contamination, it was relatively minor and could be contained. The Soviet leadership was elated. They had not only solved the immediate crisis, but they had also demonstrated the incredible power of their military and scientific capabilities. Over the following years, the Soviet Union used similar methods at least 4 more times to seal runaway gas wells. Each operation was a risky and complex undertaking, but none were as dramatic or as widely known as the original. And so the story of the fire that the Soviets put out with a nuclear bomb became a little-known episode of the Cold War, a testament to human ingenuity and the incredible lengths to which we will go to tame the forces of nature. Part 5: Legacy. Today, the site of the nuclear explosion is a quiet and desolate place. Little remains of the gas well that once raged here, except for some faded scars on the desert landscape. Yet the story of the fire and its nuclear solution continues to fascinate. Experts and historians alike are still debating the wisdom of using such a drastic measure to solve a technical problem. Some argue that the risks of nuclear contamination were too great and that better solutions could have been found. Others maintain that the use of the bomb was justified given the circumstances and the potential consequences of letting the fire continue to burn. Whatever the debate, there is no denying that the incident was a unique and bizarre chapter in the history of the Soviet Union and the Cold War. It was a time when the line between science and destruction was razor thin, when the power of the atom was harnessed not for war but for an altogether different purpose. It was the story of a fire that burned for over 2 years and the bomb that put it out. And somewhere deep in the deserts of Uzbekistan, the flame that once defied every human effort was finally silenced by the unimaginable force of a nuclear blast.